about adding value through learning content curation. So let's get, if we can move on now, let's get the presentation started. So content curation. My name's Rory, I'm here at Kineo. Obviously we're going to be on mute as we're going through the presentation, but if you want to ask any questions, then please do just use the chat, the question area, the chat area. We'll ask you one or two questions later on for a poll, so we'll present those to you as we go through. We're going to try and keep this short and punchy, but before we kind of launch into our full presentation, just want to remind everybody that we're running a week of webinars. This is number 3 of those webinars. There's another one tomorrow around interactive video, and there's another one on Friday at lunchtime, which is with our head of design here, James, who's going to be sharing best practices around design. It's not too late to register for those, so you can go to kineo.com and follow the links from there to register for those webinars. Today, I'm joined by Stephen Walsh and Paul Welsh. Paul's going to be sharing some insights into Kineo's model for curation, and we'll present a recent case study where we've provided curation as a service. We've invited Stephen Walsh as a guest speaker today. Stephen will share his experience and will talk us through how AntsPink can help us as curators through using APIs to find and filter learning. So welcome to both Paul and Stephen.
Thanks, Rory. Great to be here.
No problem. So on our agenda today, a couple of themes that we want to kind of share with you. One is the need for curation and the opportunity that presents for learning professionals, folk in L&D. We'll share that model for curation and how it can be applied. And we'll invite Stephen to talk more about the tools that are out there to help us with curation, and also how you can automate curation using the AntsPink API. So it's all about trying to keep us relevant with information. And if we look at some of the stats to put all of this into context, the other day I just did a quick kind of look up in terms of some recent facts about the web. And amazingly, there are about 3.5 billion users out there all using the World Wide Web as we know it today. Some amazing statistics about the number of content pages out there, the number of Google searches that people are doing, something like 40,000 search queries every second. So trying to find information is obviously a big task. There's lots of it out there. As learners, we have lots of questions. We want to stay ahead and we want to stay smart. But in short, there's just simply too much content and we have too little time to be able to find it all, or to find some of those answers to those questions that we may have. And that's why content curation is so important, just at the top level. So to define content curation for you, in short, there's some really simple definitions out there, which is it's a process, it's a way of finding and gathering information so learners don't have to. It's about making sense of content and presenting the most relevant information back to learners, making it easy for them to find quickly as they go about their day-to-day roles. I'm interested in how familiar you are, though, with learning content curation. So let's start with a quick poll. So let's present the question. If you could answer ABC, we'll get going. Just give you a couple of moments to answer this one. Okay, so let's have a look at the results coming through. So there seems to be a majority falling in the fact that you're interested in the concept, which is great. We welcome you to our webinar this afternoon, and I'm glad you are interested. So there you go, there's a display of the results so you can see for yourself. Excellent. So let's keep going. If I share a little bit of insight into this, we run on an annual basis, we do an insights report, so we go out, we interview clients. Some of the things that have been coming through in over the last 2 years has been, curation has been on that discussion. Lots of people out there have been talking to us about the need for curation, so it's firmly on the agenda and it's starting to stand out from the crowd. As always, there's a lot of noise out there around different topics around learning, things that you can be doing. We've classified that as the digital blizzard. Within the interviews, curation stood out as something that you want to use, something you want to get involved in. But you've been interested in what to curate and what models should you use when curating content, and how to promote it, what channels to use. Are there any issues that you need to overcome, such as IP issues? Do you need to ask permission for using content internally, and so on? So there's lots of interest, and more recently we've seen kind of a turn of phrase where learners have actually been asking you for curation services, which is really good. It creates that real opportunity for you in L&D. We've benchmarked that against other reports as well, just to check our own thinking. So if we look at the Global Sentiment Survey from Donald Taylor, over the last 2 years, curation has held firm in that list too. So it's something that we share. It is a subject out there that's keen to us all within L&D. I dare say it will become part of the BAU as part of a service package, part of a service offer that we can all use. As you'll hear from Anders Pink in a moment, Stephen, we can think about this subject as a way of how we can become heroes around continuous curated learning to help our organisations stay agile. So, Stephen, I'm going to hand over to you now just to kind of share your thoughts around how content curation matters.
That's great. Thank you, Rory, and hi everyone. Thanks for joining. So, yeah, to build on what Rory has said, both from Kineo's research and in the wider market, there is definitely an appetite and a need for curation. And I just wanted to pull out some of the things that we've observed that really make it core to business. One is this concept of our skills having a shelf life. I think we all know that the days of being trained once to do a job and then considering your training over for life are long gone. All industries change so quickly now. We've seen such disruption in industries such as hotels, transport, leisure, tech, that we have to stay on top of information. We have to keep developing our skills throughout life. And I know as learning professionals, we all emphatically believe this, that our skills can decay really, really rapidly. So making sure that we stay fresh, we stay up to date, and that we keep our skills relevant at all times, I think is incredibly important for development, employability, and for the strength of the organization. And one way that we've traditionally done that is to use formal training. So that 10% in 70-20-10, which we'll talk about a little bit more later, absolutely vital for taking people from a certain point to another point in terms of knowledge. But things change, so we need to stay smart. If you try to create a course right now about artificial intelligence, by the time you finish writing that course, it's going to be out of date because of the speed of change in that particular sector. So looking beyond that 10% to make sure that we're tapping into the most recent, most relevant content out there in the wider world, looking back in the stats that Rory mentioned, is really important for our continuous learning. And I think continuous learning and content curation are really, really tightly related concepts. So we know we need to do little and often. I sometimes liken it to staying fit. You don't go to the gym once a year or even once a month and consider yourself doing enough. You've got to be doing a little bit every day. So continuous learning or micro learning, looking at spending 5-10 minutes a day just to see what has come in, what's the most recent relevant content in the fields that I'm interested in or that my learners are interested in, and staying on top of that. I think it's about developing really strong habits around that continuous learning and curation. I don't think you can do it on your own. Nobody is as smart as everyone, as they say. I think there's huge opportunity within curation to do it together. So to encourage teams that have a shared interest or shared set of goals to work together to scan and seek and find the best content and then share it with each other to help everybody stay smart and enlarge their knowledge. The challenge with doing it, to go back to Rory's first set of shocking stats around the scale of the web, is what someone has called the content shock problem, which is just too much content, too little time. If you try to stay on top of 3 million blog posts every day, you go insane, and you probably shouldn't be reading them all anyway. But even if you just look at a small particular niche, it's very, very difficult to stay on top of content from multiple sources. And I think this is the real challenge. And to say it in a slightly tongue-in-cheek way, it's about not waking up dumber than you went to bed. Every day new content is published about all of these topics. It's shared on Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, multiple blog posts. If you don't stay on top of that, the fraction of knowledge that you understand of the total world's knowledge is declining over time, and I think it's about fighting against that. So we see curation as a really important tool to make sure that you're staying up to date, you're continuously learning, and you're constantly developing your skills. And the question I think arises, and the poll results were really interesting to me because it really reflects who should be doing this. Because one answer is to say, just let people do this for themselves. You know better what you need to curate and what knowledge you need as an individual who is L&D to get involved in doing that. And you could do that, and people will go and find stuff for themselves. But I think the problem is it's just back to busyness. And I would hold my hand up for this as well as, you can wake up every morning and say, okay, well, I'll just check LinkedIn, I'll just check Twitter, I'll just look at my top 10 favorite sites for industry knowledge about e-learning or whatever the subject might be. Hours can drift by, and you still may not find very good stuff because there's a lot of noise in all of those channels as well. There's a lot of promotional content, there's a lot of irrelevance, so there's lots of out of date. So most people just don't have the time to be expert curators to do this. They need help to at least provide them with a baseline of good content to review, reflect, and make sense of. I think that's where L&D professionals can become the real content curation heroes here. And that's not about wresting control away from individuals. Of course, people need to be self-directed and to do this for themselves. And in Towards Maturity's research just a couple of months ago, they found that about 70% of learners do curate content for themselves. They may not use that word, but they do go look out on the web, they look to Google, they look at external resources to supplement their knowledge and to stay smart. But they find it really difficult to do for all the reasons that we just looked at there. But in comparison, only 14% of organizations are doing something about it to help learners in any kind of formal or structured way. So to me, that gap really presents a huge opportunity for L&D to say, let's do curation right. Let's serve our audiences better, and let's help them find the content that's most relevant for them. And I think there's a really strong business case for doing that because you're providing great service by doing that, but there's some really hard, tangible benefits to doing it. The first is really about time. IDC did a piece of research a couple of years ago where they estimated about 25% of a knowledge worker's time is spent looking for information in its broadest sense. And that time is not always very well spent because you're looking in the wrong places, you're finding out-of-date stuff, or you're looking at multiple channels, and it can be quite inefficient. So even if you could just get that down by 5%, just think about how that scales and the saving that you create in terms of opportunity cost across your organization around that. So for me, that's the first big win around content curation. It's productivity, saving time, saving costs. But it's also responding to people. We all know in L&D how important it is to serve our internal customers. You're giving them what they want. They want recent, relevant content that they can digest in short resource format. So you're responding to that. And by doing that, you're helping the organization to stay agile. You're helping it look externally, make the most sense of the best content that's out there, and bring it in. And that's a competitive advantage, I think, staying on top of the most recent information. We know that if you're just purely inward looking and you only digest your own content, you're probably missing trends in your industry, and that's how you get Ubered or Airbnb'd if you're not paying attention. So it's really important, I think, for organizational development. It's also incredibly responsive. So rather than saying to someone, okay, we want to stay smart around virtual reality, let's go and create a formal resource around that, the time and effort that's involved in doing that, you can say, let's curate the best content right now, and let's bring that content in immediately. So it can be a very quick response to a sales team or a head of R&D who wants the latest thinking on something. You can bring in resources immediately. And it lasts as well by saving articles and by saying, this is a really good reference piece. Over time, your created content becomes a knowledge base and a benchmark for people to come back to as part of onboarding and joining the organization. It supports continuous learning and the idea of you spend 5-10 minutes a day just trying to stay fresh on a concept. And it's a way, I think, of facilitating that collective intelligence as well as inviting people to contribute to it, to debate it, to say whether it's a relevant article or not, or it's something we should act on. So it's that encouraging social learning, encouraging people to make sense of it together. And ultimately, I think all those things add up to adding value to the organization and helping the organization to continue to learn and develop. And we want to move now from kind of those business benefits and the business case for doing curation into practicalities and how to actually do it. So I'm going to hand over to Paul to take you through a model and a case study for curation in practice. So over to you, Paul.
Thanks very much, Stephen. Afternoon, everyone. So, hopefully we can see that L&D has a role to play in curation now, but, where do we start in forming some kind of model to help us find, structure and share all this content that, we've already mentioned, there's millions and millions of articles. The Seek, Sense and Share model taken from Jarkey's personal knowledge management framework is actually a really good starting point for curating content. You can see on the graphic there it's got multiple stages. So if you look at the first stage is Seek. And here the individual goes out and finds people or content which can help them develop their knowledge and skills. The second stage, Sense, is where the learner personalises the information and experiences that they've found when out seeking. So they're carrying out really a personal curation task here by adding value to what they've found. What do we mean by adding value? Ross Dawson identified 5 tasks which add value to information, which I thought would be worth sharing. The first is filtering, so separating signal from noise based on some kind of criteria. Validation, ensuring that the information is reliable, current, or supported by research. The third is synthesis, so describing patterns, trends, or flows in large amounts of information, look for those relationships. Presentation, so making the information understandable through a logical presentation. And then customization, so providing context that describes the information in a way that's relevant to you. And then finally, there's the share stage. So here the learner uses and shares the knowledge that they've acquired with others in their network. So this really encourages discussion with peers, and over time that knowledge gets challenged, leading it to being built upon, refined, or even removed from the canon of knowledge that the learner has developed. So in this model of Seek, Sense, and Share, we find, we grade and synthesize content into some kind of structure, and then we share it. So that's obviously, in essence, the foundations of a curation model, and then it forms actually the basis of Kineo's model. However, the act of curating content in a structured way for teams within organizations, there's a few additional steps, and that's what I'm going to talk through now on this next slide. So in our model, we have 5 stages. The first stage is search. It's pretty self-explanatory. It's the simple act of finding content. Aggregate, so summon all of that content into a high-level structure. We filter it, so we remove any duplication or dead wood. We add a bit more of a granular level of categorization to help learners find their way through what we've found. Fourth, add value, that term again. Look for relationships in material, tidy up the presentation of content, add the context. And then 5, promote, make it available and tell people it's there. And then actually, this is really important, encourage their participation in building on this resource. So that's kind of like the model, but what does this look like in real life? So BDO is a global accountancy and business advisory firm, and last year they approached us to help with a curation task. I actually think Vicky from BDO was joining us today, so Vicky, if you are here today, thank you very much for letting us share the BDO curation story. So let's look at what the 5-stage model looked like in real life. So search. BDO commissioned Kineo to help them curate web content that mapped against their organisation-wide competencies. So that was the search stage. We aggregated, so resources were found from a variety of different sources, both free and paid for, and then they were mapped against 6 core competencies. We filtered, so resources for each competency were categorised for different levels of experience within the organisation, from admin to senior leadership. And then we carried out a further organisation of content by assigning it to the 70-20-10 model. We also kind of removed any duplicated material or outdated content that was initially kind of found in that initial search phase. Then we added value, so information such as descriptions and context, the resource type, the estimated learner time required, and other metadata was added. And then curated material is going to be made available on the BDO LMS, and its existence communicated to the 3,500 or so learners that it's aimed at. So you would think maybe that we would need a lot of technology to do this perhaps, but actually that wasn't the case at all. As you can see on the screen now, the output was really a simple spreadsheet that captured all of the aggregated content. The real value in the task was in thinking through the necessary filtering of the information and adding the value that would make it meaningful to people, make it a really useful learning tool. So if I look at the matrix and talk you through it, on the left we have the level bracket, so at what level within the organisation the material would be most relevant. What was the title? The keyword, so it could be found easily through search. Any other related competency keywords that kind of mapped or cross kind of pollinated the material with other material that we found. The resource type. The notes that we put in when we found the content that would help us kind of maintain and keep the content current in the future. The source, whether it was LinkedIn or one of the many other sites that we used to find the content. Estimated learner time, and where within the 70-20-10 model the resource mapped. So if it was 70, was it experiential? If it was 20, social, things like blogs and discussion forums and so on, or 10 on the more formal types of learning resources. We're actually looking at the innovating and change competency at the minute. You can see along the bottom there were 5 other competencies. What was the output? I think in total we found approximately 100 resources in total. So let's take a look at the next slide about that term adding value, because that's cropped up again. I mentioned it in the BDO case study and I mentioned it in my introduction. What do we mean by adding value really? What are our top tips? I think it's worth reflecting back on some of the business benefits of curation that Stephen explored earlier, actually, before we do. Curation saves people time and therefore it saves the business money. And by doing so, we also ensure that L&D is nimble enough to give learners what they need and want really quickly. And I think in not doing this, we risk becoming obsolete because learners are going to go out there and Google it anyway. So, providing curated content is a really useful tool and I think really important to L&D. But it's not going to be, the difference between curation and aggregation is this added value. And so what are our 7 steps for adding value? Number 1, empathy for the learner. So put yourself in their shoes or simply ask them, what's going to help you or be relevant to you in your job? What do you already use? Can we include it as part of the curated offering? Have a really clear criteria. Hopefully that come across in the BDO case study. Agree how content's going to be mapped. You'll need an agreed standard or taxonomy to make sense of all of this content, particularly if you want to maintain it moving forward, and that's definitely something that you should be looking to with a curated offering. Identify the most relevant and important content. So use that Pareto principle, concentrate on 20% of the content that's going to make 80% of the difference, rather 100 really good resources than 3,000 type resources. Seek permission. No one wants to get sued. Apply context and meaning. So this is true of much of what we do when it comes to learning content. Make it relevant to the day job. Share with the right people at the right time. So pick your channels and your moment. And finally, review, maintain, and refresh. Make it a habit to maintain your curated content little and often. One of the real benefits is it's easy to curate content. So and keep it current. So don't let it wither on the vine. So I think it's time for another poll, isn't it? So what other ways have you seen curation used? If you could answer now, that would be fantastic. Thanks. Just give you a second to respond. That's interesting. We're seeing quite a close call between competencies and audiences being the most popular choices there. That's great. Thank you very much. That's really interesting. Right, I'm going to hand over to Stephen now, and Stephen's going to kind of explore and take things further. How can we use technology to really enhance the curation process and the offer?
Great, thank you very much, Paul. It's a really interesting case study, and I think it's clear the value I think that comes through in that to help the audiences within video stay up to date and stay smart with content. And I wanted to hark back to the model that Kineo set out there: the search, aggregate, filter, add value, and promote, and to talk just about particularly those first 3 steps: searching, aggregating, and filtering. And as Paul says, you can of course do this manually, and there's value in doing that. You can check preferred sites every day for content, so you can have your top 10 sites on leadership, your top 25 sites on innovation that you check. There's always going to be great stuff coming through social, Twitter, and increasingly LinkedIn is becoming more of a publishing platform with Pulse and all the articles that come through there. You can use good old Google Alerts to keep you up to date on things as well. You can use RSS feeds, been around for a long time. They still bring through useful content. You can use all of those things to start to search and aggregate content, and then you can start filtering by manually selecting what you think is the best quality content for those, and then, as Paul says, put them in the right place at the right time, copy and paste them into your learning platform. I think one of the challenges around doing curation like that on scale is, as Paul says, you've got to do it all the time. It's not something that you do once. It's something that you should be doing, continuously for your audiences and for the topics you're focusing on. And the question, I think, it's back to a theme that's been running through this webinar is, do you have the time? Do you have the time to do that? If you were trying to do this for 100 audiences in your organization, or even 10 audiences in your organization that might have 20 programs, 50 competencies, multiple different audiences, if you're going to take that on as a learning professional and try to curate at that scale every day, you're going to find yourself doing nothing else but doing that. And my guess is you've probably got other things you're responsible for doing as well. And this is where I think artificial intelligence technology can be your friend. Not to replace the human element, because as Paul said, that human discerning factor of being able to select and decide which are really the right articles from a baseline of content. I think only humans can do that, and that's where we add value through our making sense and through clever sharing of things. But those first couple of tasks around searching, aggregating, and filtering, I think you can use technology to help you a little bit with that. And that's what I wanted to show you, just a little bit about AntsPink, which is a new tool that we've been developing to do exactly that. So put very simply, AntsPink is a filter on the web. We'll find content from any source that's out there and we will filter it for you. And we can do that in a couple of different ways. You can use specific rules that you set up, so you can specify which keywords you want to see content about, which sites you want to see content from, which Twitter influencers you want to see content that they've shared on Twitter, or which RSS feeds you want to use to bring in content from. And that's what gives you kind of a baseline of content that then refreshes automatically for you every couple of hours. And then from that baseline of filtered content, you can then do that adding sense, adding value task of manually picking the ones that you think are particularly relevant to your audience and hand pick them. And I'm going to show you a little bit about how that works, and then in a moment show you, go to that last point that Paul made about promoting it in the right place at the right time, putting it in channels where people will discover it. And there's no point in doing all of this work around filtering and curation if no one can see the content. So putting it in the right place, whether that's your learning portal, your LMS, your intranet, your CRM, so important to be able to do that. We have an API that enables you to do that, and we'll show you an example of that sitting inside Totora in just one moment. So if I just come out here and just switch screens and show you the live app here. So this is AndersPink.com. This is the AndersPink platform, all completely free to use right now. So you can just go to AndersPink.com, create an account, and register, and do everything I'm just about to show you. The main way in which you start to filter and aggregate content is by creating what we call a briefing, which is in the top tab here, create briefing. A briefing is just the word we use, borrowing from the old newspaper terminology, to say it's a collection of articles, but unlike a newspaper, it refreshes automatically for you every couple of hours on whatever topic you are interested in. So just to give you a basic tour to get started, I've got some options here on the left here about the filters that I can put in here. So I can just start with keywords if I want to. I can say, bring me through articles about e-learning. I figure that's a subject probably near and dear to most of our hearts, and just add that as a word. That's going to start bringing me in content automatically in this preview mode here. What we're doing is kind of two main dimensions, and want to be very transparent about the algorithm here. Recency is really important for us. Our view is if you're trying to curate content for a professional audience, whether it's for yourself or for colleagues, you don't want to see a Wikipedia definition explaining what e-learning is. Valuable though that might be, highly ranked on Google though that might be, it's not the most recent content. As a professional who wants to stay on top of developments in a field, the most recent content is going to count a lot for you. So we default to recency. So you're seeing articles from yesterday, Sunday, this week, etc. The other thing that we use to give a kind of a first view on this content is social traction. So how well shared has this content been across Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, Google+, kind of the main four social networks. Not always a perfect synonym for quality, but it does normally indicate the more shared something is, the more likely it is to have value and have some traction to it. So that's just a very basic way of filtering content, just by using one word to bring in content here. I can make this much more specific if I want to, and I think the point around curation is not to bring in more content, it's to bring in the right content. So less can often be more in terms of getting a first baseline of content. So let's say I'm only interested in, say, trends in e-learning. I can just add in the word trends here, and this must appear in the article titles field. What that will do is it'll now refine my preview to say, bring back articles about e-learning as my main keyword, but only if they have the word trends in the title here. So now I'm seeing a series of articles that have been published in the last few days that are all about trends in e-learning. So if I am trend watching in this subject, this now gives me kind of an immediately relevant feed of content for me to add to. And I can add any other words in here that I want to. We've preloaded a bunch of words that are useful to add in one go here. So if you're looking for practical content, you might want to see articles that contain the word tips or how to, ways to, guide, etc. And I can add all those in with one click if I want to as well, or any other words that I want to use. I can also negate out words. So let's say I'm not looking for jobs and I don't want to see any jobs posting around e-learning. I can just take out any articles that have the word jobs in the title, and that will suppress any articles that are coming through on that basis as well. So that's just using simple keywords to start getting content into my briefing. I can do a couple of other things to refine it even further. If I want to track certain people on Twitter, who I think are useful to follow in terms of their expertise on e-learning. I can put in any Twitter URL here that I want to, or I can get suggestions. So what we do is we go out to Twitter, we look at who regularly shares content about e-learning, how well followed they are, and we make some recommendations for you. So Tom Kuhlman here runs the Articulate blog. Interestingly, in his bio, he says, my tweets are, they're mine and 50% nonsense, just follow every other tweet. He's being a little tongue-in-cheek, of course, but we can literally follow every other tweet, because what I can do is I can bring in Tom as an influencer, but I will only see articles filtered by keywords unless I choose otherwise here. So rather than seeing his whole Twitter feed, I only want to see when he shares a piece of content that is about e-learning. So it takes out kind of the cat video element of the internet, which is a growing corner of the web, as you've probably noticed, and will only bring back in relevant content for me, because here is, I want this to be auto-filtered for me. I don't want to have to troll through and take out stuff that's not relevant. And this goes some way towards protecting me from irrelevant content. So I can add any Twitter influencer I want to, or just take suggestions from the list here as well. I can also add any domain that I want to as well. So let's say I want to take articles from, say, Harvard Business Review. It's hbr.org. I can just add in the domain. You don't need the HTTP prefix here, and I can just add it in. Now, again, I can see all articles from Harvard Business Review if I want to, and it will just constantly refresh every article that HBR publishes and bring it in here for me. Or I can say, I only want to see articles from Harvard Business Review when they are about e-learning. So HBR might not publish much about e-learning, but if they do, I want to see it. And I don't want to have to remind myself to check the Harvard Business Review website every week just to see if they've published anything new. I want it to come in here as well. The other thing I can do is I can whitelist content to say I only want to see articles from a certain domain. So I could say, take my top 5, 6, 10 domains that I really trust as a source on e-learning or leadership or whatever the topic might be, and just add them in here and say, I don't want to see content from anywhere else on the web. I only want to see it from a series of specific domains. And that can really help you to get a very, very tightly focused, highly filtered briefing of content from which you can then start manually curating content as well. You can also add RSS feeds. If you use RSS feeds or a feed reader, you can bring in your RSS feeds and apply the same filtering as well. See everything from it or filtered by keywords. And you can also block domains. So if you don't want to see anything from YouTube, Facebook, you can block those as well. So in true Blue Peter style, I'll show you a couple that I've made earlier to give you that idea, because we've mapped it back to the great work that Paul and the team at Kineo have done at BDO, and we created a couple of briefings that show this idea in action. So we've taken that business thinking competency and focus on an aspect of business leading, which is the leadership and culture one. And I'll show you behind the scenes here, because I can open up the briefing and show you my sources in here to show you how this works. I've taken 4 keywords here. I've taken leadership, culture, leading, and leaders as kind of close synonyms of each other. I've blocked out a bunch of words about leadership. I don't want to see articles about Donald Trump in this briefing about leadership for this purpose, because I wanted to be more focused on corporate leadership. And I've added 25 domains. So I've added ones that I've seen have been top ranked as really authoritative sites on leadership or on business culture. So HBR, McKinsey, various other blog posts, PwC, various other ones in here. So I've added in those. I've said I only want to see articles from those sites when they mention leadership, leading, or culture. And I only want to see articles from these sites and nowhere else. So 25 sites might seem like a lot. But once I've put them in here, I don't have to do anything. They will just automatically track those sites for me. And as soon as they publish an article that matches my keywords, it will just bring it directly into this briefing here. So that's just kind of behind the scenes. That's what it looks like as a live briefing. It will update for me every couple of hours. So as soon as one of these sites publishes a new piece of content, it will bring it in for me. So it's a go-to place where I can just get the content right away. Once I've got the content coming in here, I can do a couple of different things with it. I can obviously go and open the article and have a look at it. So if I want to have a look at this article from Leadership Hack, How to Start Finding Ways to Invert Control, it'll just pop it open into a new window for me, and I can read it. And then I can do a couple of the things that Paul mentioned, which are so important in terms of making sense of this. I can I can upvote it, which just tells everybody else in my team, if I'm using a team account here, what I think of it. I can also save it. So this is where you can start adding that value by hand picking articles. So I might take this article, say on leadership storytelling, and say, this is a good reference one. This is particularly important to share with audiences. So what I can do is I can just save it. I've got a couple of saved folders here, personal boards, where I can track content to. I happen to have one set up on my leadership reading list already. So I just check that. And that will just save the article for me into these saved article folders here. So you can basically take any content from a live briefing that's constantly updating all the time and create a reading list. So there's the article that I just saved there, along with various other ones that I've kind of hand picked. So that's a way of using, taking that search, aggregate, filter steps that are so important to the model, using some automation to make that heavy lifting a little bit easier for you as content curators, and then setting it up so it's easy for you to hand pick the articles, add value to them, and then promote them in the right place. A couple of other things that you can do from here, just while we're here. We've got thousands of briefings set up already. So if there's particular topics that you happen to be interested in, so leadership, for example, we've got preset briefings that you can just open up and then just subscribe to. So we've done the work in finding the right sources and the domains in the background there, so you can just kind of one click to subscribe to those. If you are someone who's trying to build a reputation outside the organization, you can use this to enhance your own personal profile by sharing to the usual suspects in terms of social accounts. So share that content with your network, your prospects, with your customers, to show them that you are adding value to their knowledge by curating for them and sharing things that you think are particularly interesting for them as well. So share out to any of those networks. So that's how it works in Anders Pink. You can also have a team account where you can have multiple people in the team as well. And if you do that, you have a couple of other filters as well. You can add value by adding a comment. So you can say, I think this article is important because, so you add a little bit of your own sensing and sharing in here. And you can also flag an article as a must read if you really want to draw attention to an individual's knowledge around the subject as well. So that's kind of the key ways in which the AntsPink platform works. Create a briefing on any topic that you want, and do that seeking, aggregating, and filtering in an automated way for you. Now, to go back to the point that both Rory and Paul. Yes, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, there's a couple of questions that have come in, so I just want to take the opportunity.
Go ahead. Yeah.
So AntsPink, it's a tool that everybody can use. If they go to AntsPink.com, they can create their own personal briefings at today's date. Yeah,
that's right.
One of the key questions that's come in around that is, if there's a public briefing created, can you see the criteria that's being used for that briefing? Is it something that everybody can see? Yeah.
Really good question. Right now, no, but in the next version, which will be coming in about a week's time, yes. So you'll be able to take a public briefing and then use it as a baseline. So if you want to take, say, our briefing on whatever the topic might be, content curation for learning, probably germane to today, you'll be able to open that up, add your own sources, and tweak it to meet your own needs if you want to as well. So yeah, great suggestion. Very much on the roadmap.
Okay, fantastic. Thanks, Stephen. So if you want to use AntsPink, AntsPink.com, it's a tool that's there, ready and waiting for you now. Stephen, back to you.
Thanks. No, thanks for addressing the questions. That's great. So you can, as you've just said, you can just use this natively as a platform for yourself, or you can create teams and invite your learning colleagues in and kind of take your own medicine and curate for yourselves first and foremost. But we think the real value, I think, in a learning context is, back to that point that's been made a few times through the webinar, which is, where do you put this content so people will see it? And for us, that's all about using APIs. So APIs, as I'm sure many of you know, just ways for moving data from one application to another. So kind of embedding content in a different site, to explain it in a very, very, very simple way. We have created an API which allows you to plug content into any other platform you want to. So be that your intranet, your learning zone, your portal, whatever it might be. And we've done some specific plugins for LMSs. So for Totra, for example. So I just want to show you what that looks like in a Totra instance here. So if I go to Totra here, this is a very much unbranded, kind of plain vanilla Totra. So as I'll show in a moment, they can look a lot better than this. But just to focus on the content for a second, on this homepage here, you're seeing a couple of blocks, to use kind of the Moodle Totra terminology here. What they are doing is they're pulling content directly in from briefings that I've set up in AntsPink. So if we kind of do a quick screen move here, the briefing that I had made for the BDO Business Leadership Briefing, here it is natively on the AntsPink platform, so the storytelling, work styles, etc. here it is inside Totara. So it's just a panel. It's just displaying the content. And if I want to read any of these articles from in here, I just click on them and it will open it in a new window in exactly the same way as it does natively from the platform. You can configure these briefings in lots of different ways. So I've got a block set up here. I'll just quickly show you how that works. It's a plugin that's very quick and easy to install into your Totara, and all you do is you give the block title a name. So I might just call this test block, for example. And then you have a choice about what you want to display within your Totara LMS. You can either show one of those live briefings, as I mentioned, which is they update every 4 hours, or you can show one of your saved reading lists. So if you want to handpick the articles and have complete control over what gets displayed in Totara, you can do that. If you prefer to just let your audience see the filtered briefing and have that update every 4 hours, so every time they come in, they see new content, you can do that as well. Obviously, pros and cons with that. You need to obviously keep up to date if you're going to manually curate and remind yourself to come in every couple of days or every week to add new articles to that, or you can just see some things coming straight through here. When you choose one of these, you get a drop-down list of the briefings that you've chosen to display. So I might just say the leadership and culture one. You've got a few config options here about where you want to display the images, whether you want 1 column or 2 column, and then how many articles you want to pull through, which is a question for design, which Kineo can help you out with and figure out the right place to put these. And Rory's going to talk a little bit more about that service in a second. So I might say, for the purposes of this just sample block, I want to see 4 articles, and I want to see it in 1 column or 2 columns, and I want to see the images just sitting above. I'll just save that. And you'll see in one moment when this loads that just comes through as a block onto the home page, and then from there I can decide where do I want to move it. So there's a block I've just created there, test block. Differently to the top one, I've said I just want to see 4 articles come through here, and I want to format them slightly differently, and then I can do things like move it around, decide where I want to display it on the screen, and all of the kind of good design practice that you'd consider doing. This one over here is an example of a saved board. So this is pulling in hand-picked articles, which are coming straight from the saved articles board, this leadership reading list here. Just want to show you one other thing, because someone suggested this and we thought it was such a good idea, we decided to build it into the tool, which is, what if you're just out on the web, much as I'd like to think you spend all day on AntsPink, I know, you might find a resource just out there somewhere on the web. So just randomly on the McKinsey website here's an article about the case for digital reinvention. If I want to share that with my audience right away, I can do that with a Chrome extension, which is a free install from the Chrome store. So I just clicked on it there, and it said, where do you want to put this article? It's just like the team, which board do you want to put it in? I'll put it in my leadership reading list, and I'll just save that. So that's that McKinsey article. And if I go back into here and I just reload, you should see that article just coming straight into my leadership top picks here. Just take a moment to look. Yeah, so there it is. So there's the article that I just handpicked from the web. 2 clicks, and now it's sitting in my LMS. So I think one of the advantages of APIs in general is there's no single sign-on. Your learners don't have to go off to another platform. They don't even have to know it's coming from AntsPink. You can call it whatever you want, brand it whatever way you want in here. The whole point is putting recent relevant content right in their line of sight so that they can't miss it, and it's connected to their other learning experiences and their other workflows. So that's the way it works. You can obviously brand it any way you want to. Here's a great example from Kineo of an example site. This side panel here, an employee engagement, just treats that same content, so just the data of the articles coming through, it gives them a much nicer look and feel than I did. So, I would say, design is really important, like it is for any piece of content in here. So you want it to fit with your brand, fit with the overall look and feel of your platform, your LMS, and this is one way of doing it. So there's just a couple of examples of how it can look. You've got complete control over how you lay it out. Here's just another example of a layout, whether you display it in 1, 2, or 3 columns, totally up to you. Those are design considerations, and I think really, really important things to get right. So just very quickly to say, because I'm conscious of time, lots of different ways in which you can use curation, either as an automated filter of content that's coming straight through and updating all the time, or as a manually saved list that you handpick and add value to yourself. A few ways in which we've seen people using AntsPink as a platform so far, just as a starter for 10, and I'm sure you'll have better ideas. Keeping teams up to date, that's probably the main way, whatever industry you're in, whether it's e-learning or keeping a sales marketing team up to date, bringing in new content, then connecting it to learning. We put a lot of effort into creating our blended programs as an industry, making sure that they stay dynamic so that they've got, like Paul has done with video, essential reading and updates that help people see fresh new content when they come back in. So you complete the course, now here's the latest content on leadership, so there's something fresh there. And then those can be used as tips for micro-learning that people can take up every day. Social learning as well, to start a conversation and to spark the conversation, get people talking. You want to make sure there's live content coming into your social feed so there's something to react to. It can support that as well. Good quality sources, so exactly like the video example I just showed you, locking it down to a series of really high quality sites, particularly for leadership. We find this to be important. People are quite discerning about the content that comes through there, so you want to pick really good sources. Once you set those up, they'll just come in automatically. Keeping people up to date on changes in technology, especially around product launches. Competitor tracking, it always pays to keep an eye on what the other people are doing. You can do that particularly for sales teams. We find if you want to keep tabs on 7 or 8, 10 closest competitors, just enter their domains. You don't have to go checking their sites anymore. It'll just all come straight in for you. So it's good for sales intelligence. Also for customers, if you're going to go and see a customer, you want to know what's happening in their business or in their industry. So it helps you to stay smart before you go in and visit them as a key account or to build a relationship with them. And also sharing this information with customers. So as I was showing, you can just share straight out to social and support the whole act of social selling and keep them informed. So your curation can extend value beyond your organization to your clients, your prospects, and your network as well. Rory, I'll stop there, conscious of time, and I'll hand back to you.
Yeah, so I think we'll just kind of round things off there. There's a few questions as well, Stephen, that have come through, so perhaps spend a couple of minutes answering some of those. But in short, we're just sharing the kind of the curation model that we went through with BDO. There's some takeaways that you can see on screen now. There's some really key ones here that you shouldn't lose sight of. Things like really getting to know your audience and understanding what they need, and curating around that need is really, really key. Know your criteria. So when working with a curator, define a criteria with them which to do your searches by and to be able to log content back, etc. Use technology, use AntsPink to save time finding that content. It just makes sense. Big one for me is about applying context. So it's not just about distributing content down different channels. It's about trying to add value to that content at the same time. So the need requirement around the learner, put different thoughts around the content to start off application back in the workplace. Other things that I think some of our folks have asked questions around is, again, you should really look for trusted sources and sources that allow you to share content to get around some of the IP issues. But find the trusted sources that are recognized influencers in the subjects you're interested in and predominantly use those. Ask your end users for feedback. It's something that's organic, something they can grow over time. So ask for feedback, keep going back, revisiting it. As we say, build a habit around curation. It's continuous. So I'll pause there. There's a few questions that came up, so we're going to try to answer those in the next few minutes. Let's see, where should we start, Paul? Have you been?
Yeah, let's have a quick look. So, question. Pick up on that IP question. How does AntsPink know what content is okay from an IP perspective?
Yeah, good question. I mean, we're only finding content that's freely available on the web. So someone has published it out there, unless they've specifically said you may not display this content. You're absolutely fine to use it. We are at pains to make sure that it's clear that we're just pushing this up in a new window. So all we're doing is driving traffic back to the original site. I think a good rule in curation, and you've both said, I think, around IP is this is not trying to pass off any of this content as your own work. A good curator never does that. You always acknowledge your source. And that's very much what we do. We're very transparent about where the content has come from. A part answer to that question, as some people ask it sometimes, is what if content is sitting behind a paywall? So say ft.com or other sites that charge you for the content. Obviously, we don't bypass that. If there's a subscription required to get to the content, we'll get you as far as you can get without having to pay for the content. So whether that's kind of a free preview mode or a preview of whatever, limited number of articles. But that's how we address that. So if someone's locking down their IP for commercial reasons, we don't and we never would bypass that. So those are the things I think to be aware of. But any content that you're seeing in AntsPink is freely available on the web. It's been published out there for consumption.
Right,
yeah.
Thanks.
And if you're narrowing content down to domain name, then I guess you can go and ask permission at the domain level to use that content through the tool.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, great.
That hopefully answers Gavin's question. This question is from Holly. Could AntsPink work for internal systems? My organisation is huge, so they have a lot of internal content. Is it only external content that AntsPink would work on, or would it work on, say, in SharePoint?
Great question. Right now, it's external content, so we have a specific focus on saying let's look outside into the wider world and bring back in content. Right now, we don't troll like an intranet site right now. Thinking about it, it's a slightly different approach, I guess. So we've kept a focus on external content right now. But you can add your own resources to it if you want to. So depending on how. To answer Holly's question, depending on where that content sits, if it's also available on the web or if it has a specific URL, you could pull that content in yourself, but you'd be doing it more like I did for the McKinsey site there. You'd be kind of tagging it and manually pulling it in right now.
Great, thanks, Stephen.
There's a few questions around the commercials of AntsPink. Obviously, AntsPink, the personal use is a free resource for you to use at today's date. I guess it steps up a level, Stephen, when you start looking at the team view to this.
Team is all still free at the moment. I'll be totally transparent to everyone on the call. So we'll always have a free version. If you want to create briefings for yourself and just keep tabs on topics, we'll always have a free version around that. At some point later this year, we will move to a charge model if you want to invite in a team. So if you've got 15, 20 people in your organization and you want to all kind of work together and collaborate, we'll bring in a paid model for that. But right now, taking advantage of it all while it's free. The only thing that's not free, because I just to anticipate, I think there's a question down the road there, is about the actual use of the API itself. We do charge for licensing the API to be able to put the content into a third-party platform. And sorry, I know Rory, you're going to talk a little bit about the services that you offer in conjunction to that as well. So we can segue into that later.
So I think, let's see. So there's a few questions around commercial models, etc. Now, Kineo does support AntsPink through implementation, say, on Totra. I can't share the commercials over the webinar today, but we can obviously follow up to any questions that you want to send through afterwards. So just come through to info@kineo.com and we'll be able to answer those questions for you, and we can talk you through the type of services at a design level that we can achieve with the AntsPink plugin. It's a really good tool. So when looking at some of the wider services that we can offer, there's obviously the curation service itself that you saw through the BDO case study. So we can offer that curation as a service. We can help you with your strategy around curation. We can help you define criteria, the search strategies that you could deploy. We can obviously help you set up AntsPink within your own Totra or support you on other learning platforms, introduce you to Stephen AntsPink as well. And obviously there's an ongoing kind of management curve there as well to keep the kind of curation going, so it's about supporting that all the way through. And if you want to bring the design curated content into the blended design, that's obviously something we're doing currently for other clients through resource-based type approaches to content design. So lots of things that we can do to support you. Love to answer further questions. I think we're just about to run out of time, so to kind of wrap up, we will be sending out a link to the webinar, the recording afterwards. I think we can share the slide deck as well if need be. If you want to know more about content curation, AntsPink have just recently launched a book. That's a free resource as well, which you can download from the URL that you see at the bottom of the screen there. So I hope you've enjoyed today's webinar. We're delighted that you could make it, and if you can join any further webinars this week, I'd highly recommend the interactive video one tomorrow. That'll be a really good show. So thank you very much for your time today. And Stephen, Paul, thank you for joining in on the webinar as well.
Welcome.
Thank you very much. Yeah. Thanks everyone for joining.